everybody. Welcome to the session. My name is Hailey Johnston, and I will be our moderator today. So we are going to start off with just some guideposts for this session. I'd like to remind everybody that this is meant to be informational, and any medical decisions or questions should be made with your healthcare team. Please be respectful of everybody's lived experiences in this space, and anything inappropriate will be removed from the session. So please be respectful in the chat. And this is a Zoom webinar and is being recorded today. So if you're comfortable doing so, we encourage everybody to participate in conversation through the chat. And with that being said, open it up, tell us where you're joining us from, and thank you again for participating today. So I am the GVCC manager. I am also the board president for ESCAPE, which is an adolescent and young adult cancer support organization for those within the LGBTQ community. And my pronouns are they, them, and she, her. And Yasmine, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmine. I use she or they pronouns. Based out of Chicago, I do like diversity, equity, inclusion work in the cancer nonprofit space, but I'm also a board member.
And I'm Sheena Pruitt, hailing from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am a two-time cancer survivor and also a two-time caregiver for my mom and my grandmother, who both battled cancer. And my pronouns are she, her.
Wonderful. And Sheena sharing the important stuff. I totally forgot to include that in my introduction as well. So I am a Hodgkin survivor. I have also been a caregiver for both my mom and my step-grandmother. And Yasmine, you want to share your...
Also totally blanked on the most important piece of my intro. Also, it's like a caregiver for my grandmother and for my mother, and now just like a caregiver / loved one for my great uncle.
Great. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So we're just going to get right into it. So something we wanted to start with this topic, and when it comes to understanding our fears and being empowered in our caregiving, I think one of the important things is to identify sympathy, and when that comes to play, versus empathy, and how we are using it in our role. So sympathy often sends you into a perspective of I know best, versus empathy, where it's more of being in an active listening role and moving through the experience together with the person that is going through the diagnosis. So Sheena, is there something you'd like to share on this specifically, and then we can move into the video?
So one of the examples that kind of came up when we were brainstorming for kind of about how we wanted to talk about sympathy versus empathy is for me in my cancer journey. So actually I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma 6 years before my mom was diagnosed with mesothelioma. So we had that perspective of like, I had already gone through it. So it really heavily influenced my caregiving, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit later. But one of the things for me is I didn't like seeing the sympathy in people's faces because it came with like, for me, it came with a lot of translations of their assumptions. And so like, oh my God, Sheena's dying, or, you know, all of these things, or this is so hard for her. And while some of those may very well have been true, as far as it being difficult, it wasn't for people to quantify, in my opinion. And so, you know, Hailey said it best, that sympathy really is like this, like, oh my gosh, I feel protective. I feel like so like bad, and like, you know, their feelings can, I feel like sympathy also, feelings can get bigger than even the person that you're caregiving for, or more dramatic, maybe is the word, where empathy is like, okay, that's joining with, we're going to work on this, getting together. And it also opens up so much more curiosity, asking like, you know, what do we need to do? Like looking at the week ahead, what kind of conversations do we have? What do you like? Is orange juice still good, or are you like no more orange juice? So I just feel like it opens the door for so much more curiosity. And I really love how Brene Brown in the next video explains it. So cue the video.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Great. So I want to touch on a couple of things from the video, but also what you said, Sheena, with empathy and how it creates curiosity. I love how you put that and leaves room for curiosity. And it makes me think both with my experience caregiving for my mom before I was diagnosed, there was so much I didn't know. About cancer, about what she was going through, and I wanted to help, I wanted to show up, I wanted to know everything. And then when I was going through it myself after that, realizing that the folks in my life who came from a place of sympathy were coming, it felt almost as though it was like, oh, like, let me know if you need anything, or I'm so sorry that you're going through this experience. And it felt like it was meant more for them than it was care for me and what I was going through, and more what my mom was going through, right? And I think something about empathy and the video that we just watched, we don't have to have had the same lived experience as somebody to show them empathy. We don't have to know exactly what they are going through to show up and be there in a caring capacity. And I think that's why what you said, Sheena, with the curiosity part is so important. Being able to actively listen and ask, what is it that you need? What are the best ways I can support you through this? It's driving that connection portion of what we call empathy versus sympathy, where it's that disconnect, that like, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that. That's really hard. Right? And Sheena or Yasmine, did you want to touch on that?
Well, and I think that the I'm so sorry can be so isolating, because where it's like, how could I and even the, let me know if you need any help, that is putting the onus back on me.
Yes.
And for a person like me, both in my caregiving role and my survivorship role, I was like, I don't even know where to begin to ask for help. First of all, I'm not good at asking for help in general. But secondly, like, I almost don't have the time to ask for help. So like, I more or less appreciated the folks in both of my journeys that were empathetic and just did the thing, right? They just sent the Grubhub gift card. They just sent Target gift cards, or they just came and mowed my lawn, or they came and, they asked for my mom's chemo schedule so they could drive her to chemo so I could actually work a full day. So like, just did the thing. Like, and I think that I also have people in other caregiving roles that reach out like, okay, so a friend was just diagnosed. How can I show up best for them? Because I know that everyone's offering help, but I would rather just do the thing. And I think that, again, empathy, sends us to do the thing versus like sit back and reflect and be almost performative with sympathy. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great example. And another thing too is, I think sometimes we may not know what we need in the moment, like you're saying, or we've identified it, but we don't know how to ask. And so kind of reading between the lines as a caregiver, I think is really important. That curiosity piece of like, oh, you're saying like the laundry hasn't been done in a week. And like, maybe the person that's going through cancer is venting to you and they're like, I can't get the laundry done. I haven't had like a good meal in the past week. So picking up on those cues like, oh, okay, I can bring this meal, or I can come over and I can help with the laundry. Things like that, looking for ways you can show up and just be there is so important. And Sheena, I see you just came off mute. Go ahead.
Well, and because I think about like, again, I've struggled with these two like spaces of empathy and sympathy in general. And so like, I think that empathy does cause you to like just go into action in a little different way versus kind of going inward and being sympathetic. And so no one goes through a cancer journey alone. Single people, like no one does it. It's impossible. And so I think that if you need help, coming from that like sympathetic place is also like, no, I'm going to need help. Like everyone needs help. It's what that help might look like. And so like those open-ended questions, and that curiosity that comes out of empathy are just like invaluable as a care, and even especially as a caregiver. If you're Brene Brown in the videos talks about empathy being the sacred space, and for me, again, we'll talk about a little more in a little bit, but like caregiving is a sacred space. Like it was an honor for me to be able to caregive, and so although it didn't feel like it all the time, but like I think that empathy, like again, that's why empathy and caregiving are so strongly correlated for me.
Yeah, and so kind of segueing into our next portion of this, I'm curious to know from the audience, what's something you wish you knew before you were in the position, or what would you tell someone about caregiving? We'd love to hear just how maybe what we've just talked about has played a role in this for you. What would you like to talk about or share with us? Yeah, so knowing what to say or to do. What do I do? That is, I think, the question of the hour, right? What do I say? What do I do when I end up in this role, in this situation? And I think coming from the experience of being a caregiver before I was a patient, that was the first thing on my mind. What do I do? What do I say? How do I show up? And that's that curiosity piece, right? Like, what is it? I think sometimes we can jump to say like, oh, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. But, or a lot of our fears come up when we hear the word cancer, right? So we may jump to assumptions or conclusions about what's going to happen with this person that we love so much, based on the fears that we may have surrounding this diagnosis. And I think when it comes to the cancer, what's next is asking like, hey, how are you? So starting with like, or what can we do together? How are we going to approach this as a team or as a family? How can I best support you as a friend? Or not even asking that question, just showing up and being there is a really big way. And Sheena, would you like to chime in?
Well, and I also think that, like, so again, I had the advantage of I guess it's an advantage of being a survivor before I was a caregiver. And my mom was my primary caregiver. And I think that neither one of us, just by personality, are scared to kind of piss the other one off. And so we in both arenas, we knew that it wasn't going to be pretty and like flowers and daisies every day. So sometimes it was me being a really rude adolescent, 20-year-old, like demanding tuna salad with peas in it, still warm, like, and her realizing that, okay, I'm just going to make this happen because anything else is going to make her nauseous. And so when I went into my caregiving role, I was also able to know, like, it's time for me to put my patient pants on because she's going to get super demanding when she's going through the crud, and it is going to be what it's going to be. Like, we're going to get through it. We might like fuss at each other for a little bit, but like, it's not going to be this like super pretty. And I feel like as a caregiver, it hurts sometimes because you don't want to get into it with your person. Right. And so it's a lot of like coming back and saying, my bad, I probably went a little too far. And we're all stressed, like giving yourself grace. And I think that kind of feeds into Erin's next question about balancing caring for your others and caring for yourself. And, you know, caregiver burnout is real, but being empathetic with yourself, like that you're in a sacred space, you're trying to balance all the things, and like you can't show up for your person if you're not showing up for you, even in the smallest of ways. So I think that like it's a tricky fine line to walk, and understanding that in general cancer is ugly, and so it's not going to be cute.
Definitely. Yasmine, would you like to join in?
Yeah, I think something that was like grounding for me when I was like really in the feels and like getting kind of panicky and not really understanding, especially because I haven't gone through this experience myself, and I don't want to like fully dive into like that empathy piece sometimes. Like, you need to step back occasionally and like have that moment to take care of yourself. It's just kind of like basing myself in knowledge and just being like, I can learn more. Let me just like take a moment like away from mom. Let me just like Google a little bit more. Let me talk to like her oncologist. Like, my mom just saw her oncologist earlier this week. I was telling Hailey that he asked about me, and I haven't talked to him in like 4 years. Like, I am in this man's head forever. Because I talk to her care team endlessly. It's good for like the care team to like know who you are as like the caregiver. And sometimes like when I was with my grandmother and I was really young when I was taking care of her, I was like from age like 3 to like 5, 7 is like when I really was with her in the appointments. They knew my name too. Like, they helped me write down things. I was a child. They would like circle things for me to bring back to my mom. And I knew that my grandma was someone who wouldn't like always speak up for herself, not only because English wasn't her first language, but because just culturally, that's something that she never felt like comfortable doing. And she had an idea of like what women were in her head, and that they should just like take what they're given and not like complain about it. But when you have mouth sores and you can't eat from chemo, like, you need to tell your doctor. So then I would be that person. So understanding like her diagnosis and the side effects that come with it, like anticipating a little bit, but not like making assumptions about what's happening, I think was a really tricky line to balance, but ended up like benefiting me a lot, especially when I was starting to feel overwhelmed, just like grounding myself in knowledge and like realizing that I know more than I give myself credit for sometimes, because I am asking the right questions to the right people.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and that is such an excellent point. And I want to pull from something both of you have said. So Sheena, with it being that honor, that sacred gift of being the caregiver, but also the communication aspect, where I think sometimes when you're a caregiver, it can feel really lonely and isolating. And to what Yasmine said, you have people you can speak to, getting familiar with the care team, getting familiar with other people that may be in your life or your loved one's life going through the diagnosis. You're not alone in this. It can feel that way sometimes, even a lot of the time. But having that communication piece, if that is available, getting to know the doctors, getting to know the nurses, the social workers that are involved, being there and taking note of what needs to be communicated, that not only will help the person you're caring for, but it'll help you too. It'll relieve some of that, I guess, some of the items or things that you have to think about and do for the person that you love. It can be delegated in some aspects. Support groups in the space. There's support groups available to caregivers. I know sometimes time is stretched thin as well. You may be not only taking care of your loved one, but maybe your family as well, or their family, if you're in a really direct role. And so time is sacred and time for yourself is sacred. But if speaking with other people who are going through a similar experience is something that you need, that could be a really good way to be like, okay, this is my time for me to work through some of what I'm experiencing, and having other people to share what you're going through, who are also going through similar things, can be really beneficial for our own mental health, but also it can prevent a lot of, I guess, like, animosity is the wrong word, but feelings of just, you know, I don't have a, sorry, thank you, yes, resentment. It can prevent some resentment in that dynamic of being the carer versus the one being cared for. Yasmine, I'll start with you. Did your caregiver responsibilities change over time?
I think about this a lot just because I feel like being a caregiver is, I think when you like look it up or when you see depictions of it in media, it seems really like very static, like you do this thing and you are always this thing, when in reality, like caregiving is so dynamic and you're meant to like adapt to different situations. And sometimes you are the caregiver, sometimes you're the loved one, like sometimes there needs to be space and maybe you're not the right person in the situation, but maybe you are. Like it's a privilege to be in that space, but it's also okay to take a step back or for that person to tell you like, I need someone else right now. And I definitely felt that like when I was like taking care of my grandma since I was so young, I played like a very specific role as like a translator, but translation is never literal. It was like being like an advocate in a way too. So it was kind of fun, like growing up, understanding it with my grandmother that way and like growing up together like that. And my mom did a lot of the caregiving for my grandmother outside of me going to appointments. So then like I got to watch my mom be in that role and watch her switch between like her mom had, because she just had another baby, like my youngest sibling, so there's 3 girls that she's now balancing, and we're living with our grandparents and my grandpa is panicking and he doesn't know what to do and my grandma's like not telling anyone how she's feeling. So just seeing her like jump between the roles, but also like knowing when to step back. Sometimes like another relative would come in, or like we were so privileged to live in a really big immigrant community, so we had food on our table like constantly. I always had someone's house to go to. There's like other people that can take that role as well, and I understood that. So then when I was in that role, when I was older, I think I was like 19 when I was taking care of my mom, I knew that like my caregiving needed to like change as well and couldn't always be the same, because I would just burn myself out. Like I was in college at the time, my 2 sisters were at home in high school. I just was kind of their bossy oldest child leader, and I got to do what I always wanted to do, which is telling them what to do. But it was interesting to see, like I wasn't home, I was long distance caregiving, so I didn't always feel like my role was as dynamic, but I saw their role being really dynamic, like when they need to go to appointments, or sometimes they just need to be students, like they were going through college applications and like ACT, SAT prep. So sometimes it's like just that. And then maybe I come home from break and then I'm like, siblings, like you can go hang out with your friends and do whatever you've wanted to do. Like it's not my time to like step in the most. So stepping in, stepping out, and like switching places, especially like when you have a community around you. I know it's a privilege to have like those people there, but like mobilizing them and like having a little call to action, like you should do this thing, you should do that. I think that comes from like the knowledge piece again. So like knowing a little bit about what to expect, and then like knowing that you can't put all those expectations on yourself. You need to understand that other people can take that too, can be really helpful in like understanding what a caregiver really looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on something really important, is when you're in that caregiving role, you may be caregiving for like your siblings, right? So I'm also the eldest of my family, and when my mom was diagnosed, I stepped into the role of not only caring for her, but caring for my 5 younger brothers and sisters. And that's a lot of responsibility. You're taking on multiple roles and multiple dynamics and juggling, I think, way more than what we think of when we think of a cancer caregiver.
Well, and I think about like the necessity to kind of set boundaries and compartmentalize things in order to manage the shifting that happens in caregiving. So I have never been great with blood, guts, or bodily fluids. Like that has always been like, no, not my own, like, no. And so when my mom would have surgeries, it was very well known, Sheena was not the wound care person or the incision care person. I will go get the food, I will clean the house, like I will do anything prior to that. But like, and I'm okay. And because I had already gone through chemo myself, I also was not the person to go sit in the infusion center with her. Like the sight of the bags made me nauseous. So I was the person that would drive to the appointments, drive her and my aunt to the appointments. My aunt would sit in there and read books with her and do all the things. And then I would be there at the door. We would go get dinner. And so being able to compartmentalize and also knowing your strengths, like at a certain point, it becomes, caregiving is such a self-awareness journey also, because being able to say I'm doing it, like I'm doing too much, or like, ooh, that the last couple of days I've really been operating out of a place of sympathy or like overcompensation, and like I'm just doing too much, and I'm either gonna burn out, piss my loved one off, or like both. So being able to take a step back and like being able to kind of self-check yourself or self-check. And so I think that my caregiving changed across and my mom, she was diagnosed in January and passed in August. And so that's a small time frame for what I feel like the 7 different roles that I played, and also was my mom and my best friend. So there were times where I was really intentional about, like, today we're going to pretend there's not cancer and we're just going to go shop like we used to. We're just going to go out to eat, or we're just going to go play bingo at the bar. Like we're going to do the things we normally would do, because that's one of my roles with you. Like I'm going to take off my caregiver hat. I'm going to put my daughter hat on. And sometimes I had to put like my super advocate bad guy hat on because she wasn't feeling well and people weren't listening to her. She was too tired to fight. So knowing that caregiving is so dynamic and is such a self-awareness journey, and we're not PCAs coming into our loved one's life. This is somebody that you've known, somebody that you've been around. And so there's also that role to be fed.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's all of the different hats that you have to wear. And something that came up for me in my experience with caregiving with my mom versus my step-grandmother. So I moved to my current location in Michigan, partially to be a caregiver for my grandma who was in a hospice at that time. And something that I saw come up in my role and in my dynamic was being a mediator. And also trying to help where I could, because my grandpa was, he was doing so much. He was taking her to all of the appointments. He was making sure that everything was okay with her oxygen tank and stuff around the house, and he wasn't getting much sleep. And my whole family lives in Michigan, and so there was a lot of questions like, what's going on? And so kind of communicating to my aunts and my uncles, and also being there as a supporter just for my grandma. She was in the middle of planning her memorial service, and it was really hard for her to do, but she sometimes felt really alone in it. And being able to sit with her and just listen to what she was going through, and also help her with picking out the right songs, and figuring out who she wanted to speak. And in that, while there was a lot of grief with what we were doing, there was so much joy because it was her. She had the ability to show everybody who she was, and she had a lot of, I'd say, control over the legacy she was leaving. and sorry, it was really beautiful. And I know not everybody gets the chance to do that, but I think something that can be really hard in the caregiver space is showing up and having those conversations about death, because you don't want that person you love so much to leave. And being able to be there, to sit with them and to hold that space for them is so special. And something that I would do over and over and over again. But that role with her was so different from my role with my mother, where I was picking up a lot of the tasks around the house, and in my role with my grandma, I was just really there to listen. And I know it meant the world. And I know that it's something that if you're just trying to figure out what to do or what to say, sometimes just sitting there, just listening, just being is enough. It's more than enough.
Hailey, like, so much love to you. Like, I know so similarly how that journey is. And for my mom and I think, again, personality just kicks in at a certain point. And we were very direct communicators, and but like, we actually created time. Like, I remember like sitting at her dining room table, like playing cards and saying, okay, for the next 10 minutes, we need to talk about funeral stuff. Like, we know that eventually this is going to come up. We don't have a timeline. So like, this is stupid and we don't want to have this conversation. We're going to name it. And then we're going to just like, what do you want? And then I just got a pen and piece of paper and wrote down whatever she said for the next 10 minutes. And then we were like, okay, back to our card game. We were able to switch back and forth, which I know is like, some people would say is maladaptive, to like talk about something so dark and heavy and then just really go back to playing cards. But it worked for us. And I think it also worked to be very clear about like what role we were in or what space we were in. Like, today, I'm picking you up. Am I your like daughter who's going to have to be the bad guy at the infusion center? Or am I picking you up and you feel like you have the energy to like advocate for yourself today? So really being able to just say the thing and do the thing. Like, I feel like that's so, it sounds so simple, maybe even cliche and mundane, but when it comes to like caregiving, like, you have to, there isn't space to be quiet and timid and be avoidant, because the diagnosis is happening. The treatment is likely happening, even if your loved one chose not to be treated. That is a treatment choice, in essence. So like, there's at some point some planning that has to happen. And so being able to have that space and hold that space, and if you have to like put parameters on it, we're going to talk about it 10 minutes today, and then we'll try to touch on it again in a week. Because, you know, for my mom, it was really important for me to respect what I wanted to know what her wishes were. And so I think that that's just a big element of it, is just that open communication and asking the questions and leading with curiosity and all the things that we've said.
Yeah, I think that takes like a lot of growth as like a person to be like thrown into that situation and like be so direct and open about that. And it's a great challenge to have, and I think good for the relationship. It also can sometimes like put a strain. And I think part of that is because sometimes as like a caregiver, and I definitely did this too, like especially with my grandmother, I was like, grandma is helpless. Like, I always need to be there in like this capacity. But like over time, like my grandmother definitely got like much better at advocating for herself, like learned how to fill out the doctor's forms, knew exactly where to go in the hospital. I remember like one day she was like, actually, like, Chico, can you stay home? Like, I don't want to take you to my radiation appointment. I was like, but I'm so cute. Why would you not take me to your radiation appointment? And she was like, well, you always ask for like a happy meal afterwards. I don't want to go to McDonald's. So I was like, okay, grandma, that's fine. I think she'd been waiting to tell me, like, break the news to me. But I think she also like, but later I was like, how did it go? And she was like, I knew which doctor to talk to. I knew which center to go to. I knew how to feel. Like, I realized it was also like my grandma was like also learning, not just that she didn't want to buy me McDonald's, but that she like was learning more as a patient. So like, it's great to learn as a caregiver, but then also acknowledge that like your loved one is also learning too. And like together, like you're on very different trajectories sometimes, but they will tell you like when to step back sometimes, or you can ask if you're noticing that like the dynamic is changing, like when you should step back or when you should fulfill like a new role now.
Absolutely. And to both of those notes, like, I think sometimes with a diagnosis, we can, in maybe our projection with our fears, it can be like, oh, this is now my person, like they are now the diagnosis. And it's so important to separate the diagnosis from the person and just really identify like this, they are still themselves. This is still my mom, this is still my grandma, this is the person that I love, and doing those things that they love with them, or the things you love with them, is so important. And like you were saying, Sheena, like, okay, we're gonna put a pin in this and we're just gonna go play bingo, right?
Well, and also like, I think I reflect on like how role reversal like affected my caregiving, because, you know, like it's my mom, she's done everything for me. And then there were times I'm like barking at her, like, no, you need to take this med, or no, like she wanted to go to the casino. I'm like, your blood count is too low. We are not going to the casino. And she's like getting a little pissed because she's like, wait a second, you're my kid. You can't tell me what to do. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm also gonna be the one driving you, so I'm not driving to the casino. And like, you know, and so like, being cognizant of like that protective role that comes up as caregiving. Like and maybe it was because it was my mom, but like, I was like, no, you people can't come over here. Like, and I'm an only child too. So it's also like, nobody else had anything to say but me. But like, I got really protective of her, especially when her counts were lower, you know, whatever. But role reversal played such a big part, like when it came down to it. And I think that if we didn't have those like blunt and very like candid conversations, it could have drove a big wedge in our relationship, which would have been like the opposite of what I wanted, especially when she was, you know, moved from, you know, like palliative care to hospice. So I think that like, again, that self-awareness journey, I feel like I can't say that enough, like being so self-aware and knowing like, okay, hey mom, I have to say no. Like, it sucks. And I want you to go to the casino as much as the next person. And we just can't today.
Absolutely. I saw a lot of that show up in my grandpa and my grandma's dynamic, where he'd be like, no, you cannot go on a walk by yourself. You like stay there so you don't trip over your oxygen tube. And then she'd be like, can you believe this guy? I'm like, okay, I will walk behind you like a little duckling, making sure that you aren't tripping over your cords and you can get up and have some of that independence. So also being there, listening to both people, I feel like in that role I was very much a secondary caregiver, just kind of there to be there for both of them. And so listening to my grandpa, like, she's not listening, she's gonna hurt herself. And then listening to her, like, I'm not gonna hurt myself. I'm like, well, let's make sure you don't. And finding the way to balance both of their needs. So he really needed to know that she was going to be okay. She really needed her independence. And I was there to make sure she was okay and also help her have that independence in those moments, right? So yeah.
Yeah, how many times I got barked at, I'm fine, go find something else to do. Go find someone else's burden. I'm like, oh, I'm a burden now. Okay, that's fine. No, I need dinner, thank you.
And I think sometimes too, just letting it roll off your back, right? I think that's such an important part of being a caregiver, is that extending that grace. Like, okay, they're going through a lot right now. I'm going through a lot right now. Maybe taking a step back, giving yourself some space to breathe. Like, okay, that was a really intense moment we just had. This is really stressful. Finding ways to center yourself and then come back to it.
And like Yasmine said earlier, like knowing when you're not the person, like when I had to tell her that I wasn't driving her to the casino, and then like I was like, I think I'm gonna go home now, because we weren't living together, and like knew that like I'm not going to be the person the rest of this evening because she didn't get what she wanted, so I'm just gonna leave. And I had that benefit of being able to do so. Some people can't do that, but like even acknowledging like maybe I need to give them some space for a little bit because we just had a moment.
Absolutely. I think I'm like really seeing that with my great aunt and great uncle right now. Like I am in more of like the loved one role and like kind of long distance caregiving, but definitely not like the primary caregiver. My great aunt is the primary caregiver for my great uncle. And there's definitely been like a lot of tension and friction in their relationship because of that. And we would notice that like my great aunt would be calling us and like trying to rant about how her husband is driving her nuts. So I was like, I understand, we're trying. And then we were like, what would be best for her as a caregiver to be taken care of too? Like sometimes you need a caregiver for the caregiver. So then we sent in my grandma as like reinforcement, like grandma and grandpa, you go stay with a great uncle and great aunt in Indiana as like the buffer. And it worked like perfectly. They've been there. My grandma gets to talk smack about their husbands with her sister. And it's like, it's awesome. That's like how they grieve and how they deal with things. The grandpas get to sit, play bridge online, read their book in complete silence, which is like everything that they could ever want. So they just have their own like spaces that they need sometimes. And like, it's okay as like the caregiver to feel that frustration, or as like a loved one who's like kind of watching from the sidelines to like help and try to like send in like more reinforcement to take care of the caregiver as well, instead of just like the patient.
I love that. Absolutely. And I think I want to kind of explore more like how, as a primary caregiver, even, or maybe one of the people who are more directly involved, like that organization bit of it, how like bringing in your community, bringing in that reinforcement in other people. What are some ways that you have identified those people? And what are some things that I think maybe our audience could look for in identifying additional support or help for them in that role?
This is like where I thrive. Like what I, as a like an occupation, like as on the side too, like I do community organizing, and like this reminds me so much of community organizing. I think caregiving and community organizing, they have a lot in common, and what that means like is like building a community out for yourself. So like something I did like when my sisters and I found out about my mom's diagnosis, I was like, okay, we're all going to sit down on a call. We're going to draw a map of our relationships, and we're just going to figure out like who we know, or distant aunts, uncles, whatever country they're in, what language they speak, and if they know anything about like cancer, caregiving, like whatever task my mom needs us to do, even if it's like paying the bills, like who knows how to pay bills? Like let me ask, like busted by uncle, maybe. So just like identifying those people in your life that might have those different skills, and knowing you're not going to find that in one person, but if you just like map out your relationships, like people will be more willing to help than you even realize sometimes. I know like part of that is also like cultural, but a lot of it came from just like them knowing what we needed. Like I think a lot of them were like waiting for us to tell them like what's going on, and then them trying to like decipher what we need, but they're not there most of the time. Like we're there the most. So having an idea of like what we need help with, and then them knowing like, oh, the kids are struggling with this, like I can step in that way, just like mobilizes people. And I think it gets rid of that like that sympathy response, because it's like a direct call to action. They're like, I don't have time to be sympathetic. I need to like help them like now. I know how to pay taxes and I know how to do dishes. So like going into those things can be really helpful, and like less overwhelming for like people who are more in like the outer circles to like be involved, so that you do feel like more supported when you do need to step back if things get overwhelming. Like they'll know you better and like be able to identify what those needs are.
I am horrible at this. So where Yasmine thrives, I am like, no, I will do it. Like I very much have a mindset oftentimes in across many facets of my life. If I want it done, I should probably do it myself. So my hyper independence kicks in, but my mom knew that about me. But so we traveled. So her clinic was about an hour and a half away. She went to Mayo. So it's about an hour and a half drive from where we were, where we are. And she, there was like a whole like posse of us that went down there. And there was like oftentimes like 7 of us, 2 hotel rooms full for her chemo treatments. And people would be like, why? And it was almost this like, you know, that song, like the farmer and the dell, like the mouse needs the cheese and the cat needs the mouse. Like that's what it was. It was like my mom would make my godmother come because she knew that I couldn't go into, like, I couldn't do the infusion center. And then she would have my other aunt come because I would need somebody to go shopping with me while she was going to get her infusion center. And then like somebody else would come because they needed to, like, it was like literally this like weird Avenger assemble, but it was enough. It was just perfect enough. And my mom did most of the organizing in that realm, that she knew how to place people in roles that wouldn't make me feel threatened or make me like go like, no. And so like there definitely, again, it's part of that dynamic side of caregiving. Like there was definitely moments that my mom was taking care of me in this situation. And because that's just not my strength, and being able to know that that's not my strength, I was not going to call people and say, hey, I can't go in the infusion center with her. And I need somebody to go in there so she doesn't go by herself. If somebody wouldn't have volunteered, I would have probably found some Benadryl, or like brought Benadryl with me and just went and like suffered through it, which would have not been good for anybody. And so, and like similarly, like if there wasn't my aunt with me to like dink around while she was going through her infusions, I would have probably like anxiously sat outside of the infusion center, you know? And so like being able to know my strengths and allow my caregiver or my person to caregive for me, even though I'm caregiving for them, was huge.
And for me, I was in a very different role in both of my caregiving situations. And I think for me, when I was caregiving for my mom, I was 15. And then I was diagnosed 6 weeks after her with the same cancer. So we were both going through a diagnosis. So I went from doing all the things that I could, helping my siblings with their homework, practice for sports, and also taking in information and taking care of my mom when I'd come home from school, to then also being sick. And then everybody's like, oh, now what? Like the eldest child who does know how to step in that role isn't able to do that now either. My dad worked full time, and our local community stepped in. And I think something that I saw myself doing a lot was working like as more of an advocate for myself and my mom with these people who were stepping in our local community who I had never met in my life, and just informing them of like our likes, our dislikes, and our needs that were showing up. I think like asking for help is really hard for my family. That's like when my family's going through a hard time, we're a lot more quiet about it. And especially my dad, he would try to never let on that anything bad was going on. And when I was diagnosed, I think that was just like a moment where like it was hard with my mom, but then we were both going through it. And his colleague stepped in. We had a meal train from his coworker's wife, and I was able to at least communicate with everybody what we liked, and that was enough. And the role, it changes, it's dynamic, it can be so many different things. And caregiving, much like cancer, it's not just one diagnosis, it's not just one role. There's so many different ways we can step in and show out for the people we love. And I hope in this session you were able to get some ideas on how to show up in a way that works for you and your family. And we are so grateful that you came to participate today. Thank you, Sheena and Yasmine, for your stories and your experience with us. Thank you, everyone. We will see you at the next session.